Hello everybody and welcome back to another Hellbound Garage. Today we've got another update on the small block manual swapped Datsun 280Z running LS ignition coils and Ford Lightning injectors. Before that, I do want to apologize. It has been a couple of weeks since I posted my last video, and well, life gets in the way and Mother Nature gets in the way. I don't know about you, but more than anything, the weather very much determines how much time I spend out here working on stuff like this. And well, Wisconsin weather this time of year just plain sucks. But it is now officially spring, so hopefully it starts to warm up and we can get back out here making sure that this thing runs for this race season. The big problem right now is I have been working on the Datsun since the last video, but it's a very detailed process. It goes back to that saying that the last 10% of any project is 90% of the work. Well, I'm not at the last 10% of the car, but to get this engine fired up, I am getting very close to that last 10%. And well, as you can see, I got quite a list here that I've been going off of. So let me show you what's been done since the last video, because I think since the last update was the engine going back into the car. So let me show you everything else that's been built or re-put back in the car. First things first is my fuse relay panel. This looks like a very complex piece here, but it's actually very simplistic. Let me show you just essentially what all of this is. I do like to break everything down on paper. That way later on I don't forget exactly what I did, so I do have this here. I'll show you real quick. If you break it down into its simplest form, this is what's going on with that entire panel. So the main power wire from the battery goes to this bulkhead that then goes into the engine bay. I use it as a junction box to then feed 3 main fuse blocks, which are those 3 right there. From there, the power runs through a fuse and then into a relay and then off into whatever it controls. Now in some cases, like on this board, after it goes to a relay, it actually goes through a secondary fuse box and then off to whatever it's feeding. My switches, which are those guys over there, my switches also have a fuse power that then go to the relay and then are grounded out. Now, even with it being that simple, there's a lot of it. So I actually have this guy here. This literally tells you every relay and fuse, where it goes and where it runs to. On the back side of this board, there's a bunch of junction boxes that then go off into these weather pack connectors, which are these guys right here. I tried to elevate my wiring skills a little bit on this one by using correct sheathing for everything, as well as these weather pack connectors. These were great up until COVID hit. These are a GM style connector, so when the supply shortage happened, these pins that are in here were actually really difficult to get a hold of because places like GM are priority. Overall, still way better than the butt connectors that I am used to already since I've put this in. This is now the second time I've put this whole system back in the car. I really don't like certain things about it, and over time I will end up redoing this, but once again, everything I'm doing right now is an effort to get this car back on the road so I can drive it and have it for this race season. Next thing is, if you can tell, I have the entire engine harness put back into the car. This is an engine harness I made by myself. I did use a pre-wire harness. It's like an 8-foot wiring harness from the company that makes my ECU. I have made them from complete scratch. The biggest difference between this harness and one that like you or myself would make is all the wires are labeled. They tell you exactly where they got to go, and they're labeled like every 6 inches. Makes it super nice, super easy to tell where everything's got to go. The other thing is this ECU doesn't use like a lot of the standard style plugs. It uses more of a computer connector, a DB37 connector. This one actually has 2 of them because of all the things that it has to monitor And those DB37 connections have really, really small pins to put these wires in, because the wires are like 22 gauge. So if you're not very careful on how you solder those in there, you can cross connections without even knowing it, and you would like explode your brain trying to figure it out if the problem popped up later, because it would be inside that connector. So that's the whole reason I bought the done harness, because it was labeled and the connector past that doesn't have any of the connections for anything like the ignition coils or the injectors or water pump, any of that stuff that is connected to the harness. Those connections are not provided to you, and you have to cut the harness down to length and put the connections on. One of the things that I had to come up with for this engine, because it's not your standard combination, is this bracket and the sensor. The sensor is the crank sensor that runs everything. It uses a toothed wheel. It's got, I think it's a 60-to-1 toothed wheel, and this missing tooth is that one in the name. And every time that makes a rotation and the sensor sees that hole, that tells you where top dead center is within the motor, or however it's timed. Now the big problem here was finding a bracket system to hold this sensor. Companies like MSD make their own trigger system. The problem is they don't sell just the bracket, which I was really hoping for. So I ended up having to go through, and I got lucky, and I took some measurements, made some holes, cut some things, and the bracket turned out great. It was, like I said, I got lucky doing it. I essentially started by drilling the 2 holes for the bolts that line up on the block, and from there, after drilling the holes in, I could slide bolts into the holes, into the plate, and the plate sat flush against the block, and then I could use a pen around the radius and get me the radius, and then from there I was able to eyeball the radius and take some measurements and able to make an arch. I'm not sure you're gonna be able to see it, but there's an arch in here, and then there's an arch with this bracket here, and this bracket then follows that arch up and down and allows me to adjust the timing. This sensor also moves in and out because the entire body's threaded, so I can get the correct spacing between the crank and the sensor. Another problem that I had with this is I didn't know where to take and put the intake air temp sensor, or the IAT sensor, because in most modern vehicles they just throw it into the throttle body or it's in the intake tube. Well, this is a carbureted vehicle, and as much as I will have some kind of an intake to route to the front of the vehicle to get fresh air and not get hot air from the engine bay, for now I'm using just your standard small block Chevy filter setup. And for that, if you look in there, there's where the sensor's at. I figured I'd put it towards the back, that way it's not reading cooler than some of the air that it's getting. It's reading from the hottest possible. That way the tuning is as safe as possible. Now, other things that I've had to build or reconfigure based on the new setup compared to the carburetor that was in this before was simple things, but I didn't know anything about it until I went to go put my old parts back in the car. Things like my throttle cable bracket, and even just the throttle cable, the distances and the setup may in essence be the same, but the lengths and the clearances were not the same as a carburetor. So things like this throttle cable here, I had to buy a new one and reroute it because the carburetor linkage had it set back here and not out to here. The other thing is just this throttle cable bracket itself. The old style that I had wouldn't clear the idle air control valve, so I had to buy something different there. And then another version of this didn't actually clear the fuel rail and the bracket that holds fuel rail in place. So I ended up coming up with this, and I still ended up having to bend one of the tabs back there in order to get it to clear. Things that you think are very trivial and minor, but can be a big setback. I mean, that was almost a week's wait to get a bracket that would fit right, and to get a throttle cable to remake everything, along with the throttle cable. And down here, you're probably not gonna notice, see that circle right there? That was where my throttle pedal stop was at, and it was adjusted for full throttle on the carburetor. With the new throttle body and the way that it throws, I actually ended up having to remove the stop altogether to get full open on this new throttle body, so all 4 of the butterflies would let in as much air as possible. Other little hangups were, like I said, the weather pack connectors. I needed some very specific ones that I completely forgot about, or the stuff that I had here, I didn't have enough of one thing or another, so I ended up having to order some things, you know, just little stupid stuff. Another thing that took a little while, mostly because my hand cramped, was the spark plug wires. These are custom LS coil to small block Chevy ignition wires with heat boots on them. Not a lot of people are going to be doing this, but putting LS ignition coils onto a small block Chevy is relatively easy, but also not easy. And what I mean by that is you can buy a small block Chevy set of wires, but you can't plug them into the coils. So in order to do that, buy LS ignition coil boots and plugs, and then cut them down. So I figured I'd show you one of those real quick, just because I have 7 of the 8 made, so I'll show you what the last one entails, to kind of show you something in this video besides a show and tell. Alright, so first things first, when you are adapting any spark plug wire to a car as well, you need the spark plug wire. And I also happen to have these boots. These are the same material that my exhaust header wrap is made out of. Once again, just another level of protection to make sure I don't melt through this. So I installed my spark plug wire onto the spark plug, put my boot on to make sure that everything was good there, and then I measured to see where my wire needs to be cut at. After I measured my spark plug wire and took the spark plug wire off the car again, I then used my tin snips to cut straight through the wire. Just the easiest way to do it instead of trying to use wire snips. They lay it out for you all in this deal, but the next step is this guy here. This is a nifty little tool that they provide that allows you to crimp down the terminal ends, as well as figure out where to cut it perfectly. So in this little dude here, there's actually 2 different diameters of circles, and that correlates with the type of wire that you ended up with. It's kind of a universal deal. Alright, so now that it's in the correct hole, you just put it to the end right here, flush with the end, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see, but you just take your X-Acto knife right across this edge here, and you cut this chunk of the boot off. You just spin the wire as you keep the blade flush against this, and it comes out perfect. And you end up with an end like this after it's cut. So from here, we actually have to slide this boot, which is a royal pain in the butt, onto the wire. So I'm not sure if this is the correct way to do it, but I have this petroleum jelly that I pack in my oil pumps to help prime engines on first startups. Just an old school thing that I've learned from somebody. This actually, I put this on the outside part of the spark plug wire, and it makes the boot a little easier to slide onto the wire. No matter what you do, it's still a big pain. I mean, it's rubber on rubber, and it is a very tight tolerance. So I'm going to get this slid on here real quick, and I'll be back. And there you have it. Now, you got to be careful, because if you get too much of that jelly on this sleeve, it'll actually damage the sleeve, because I guess the oils in your hands and oils and things deteriorate the material that this stuff is made out of. So you gotta be careful with that. All right, the next thing you gotta do is you gotta put the end on. This is just sitting on here right now. You probably can't tell. I don't know if it's gonna be able to. No, probably not. But anyways, that little wire end is folded over and then put on the bottom side of your terminal to make a really good connection. you have to, when you loop it over, you have to make sure that there's like an 1/8 inch gap, I think is what the instructions say. And for what I can tell after doing this for a few of these, it's to make sure that when the terminal squishes around the wire, that it doesn't break the inside of the ignition wire. It is really hard to show you this, but the terminal, this guy here, this U shape is pointed upwards to inside of this little black piece that has, oh come on, a W. And so the W is upside down from the U. What that's going to do, going to provide the curling force that then clamps down onto the wire. So after that, so after you've got this figured out, you set it into the bigger second piece, and then you set it into your vise, and then you just crimp down, and it'll stop. There's little fingers in this that you can't tell on this that will make you stop after it's got the correct crimp. And there it is. It's crimped on. You feel a little give when the fingers round over and start to crimp down on the wire. But that is your spark plug wire. So from here, we will slide this boot back on and then get it onto the engine. And like that, we've got our 8th and final spark plug wire. Now everything is connected in the engine bay that is needed to start the Datsun. It is. But a couple of things. One, there's a few grounds on the interior that I need to finish. But the other thing is I don't have any way of monitoring the engine after it starts. Or cranks, or make sure I got good oil pressure or anything like that, because everything is mounted in the dash and everything is electronic. So before I actually crank this over and make sure that this motor's still healthy and everything goes good, I need to finish doing some things with the dash, which I'll probably do in the next video. That way I can finally put this sucker to work and see if my engine and all this effort was worth it, or if I should have stuck to a carburetor and distributor, which is still a possibility because it's a small block. Now, along with this guy here, this is my MS3X with the expansion card on it, so I can control 8 coils and 8 injectors individually instead of running wasted patterns. Along with that, I do have a board that I will have to put together, and I'll probably do a time lapse of that. I gotta solder a bunch of really little pieces onto a board, and that is to test and make sure that this is good. So everything that's in here is built by myself. There is a lot of little pieces. It's 2 circuit boards that control everything, and you know, certain customizations have been done to it specifically for this setup. Now, I've done this once before. I did this on the original L28 that was in the car to begin with, and I think the whole reason that the small block is even in the Datsun is because I messed up with something on my old MS, at that point, MS2 setup. And I don't want to take that chance again. One, this is like twice as expensive as the MS2 style, and well, the engine's more expensive than the L28. Everything's just more expensive and more intricate than the L28 and the MS2 setup that I had. And the last time I did this, I got so mad when something happened that I yanked the motor, yanked the trans, got rid of all the electronics, and went with a carbureted small block. I want to be sure without a doubt that that ECU is not the problem for this engine. I want to make sure all the electronics are not any of the problem. I want to make sure that everything runs smooth. Is it going to? Probably not, because it's a brand new setup, a very niche or special setup that's not done by a lot of people. So I want to make sure everything goes right. With that being said, I think I am going to end this update video here. I'm sorry if I didn't add enough detail. I know I glossed over a bunch of little things that I've done over the last couple of weeks. Like I said, it's really tedious things that last 10% of something that's just taking forever. In the next video, I will be building the board for my MS3 to double check that, make sure everything is good there before actually plugging it into the car. I will probably be doing the dash, so next one, there should be some decent content over this show and tell kind of deal. But like I said, life gets in the way. Things happen. Mother Nature kind of makes you not want to be outside. And, you know, that's life happens. But anyways, thank you for checking in on this update. Like I said, the next one will be hopefully so much better. Anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. Until the next one.
Do what it takes, I ain't making mistakes like that. I'll bleed on your face to make you go take it back. I'll lose my